Welcome to Dreamful Podcast, bedtime stories for slumber. I would like to start off this episode by thanking our newest supporters, Denise Garrison and Angela Lambert. Thank you both so much, and I hope you have the sweetest of dreams. If you'd like to support the show and gain access to the subscriber-only episodes while receiving a shout-out, visit dreamfulstories.com, and on the support page, find a link to become a Buzzsprout supporter or subscribe via Supercast if you listen on Spotify. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Relationships can influence how we interact with others and the world around us, whether it's a relationship you have with yourself, a significant other, friends, or coworkers. For example, if you don't have a good relationship with yourself, it could be hard to create deep connections with a partner. Therapy can be a place to work through the challenges you face in all your relationships. If you're thinking of starting therapy, I recommend giving BetterHelp a try. It's convenient and entirely online, so it's much easier to squeeze a therapy session into your busy schedule. Become your own soulmate, whether you're looking for one or not. Visit betterhelp.com/dreamful today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/dreamful. In this episode, I will be reading a Belgian fairy tale called The Golden Dragon. So, snuggle up in your blankets and have sweet dreams. In one part of Belgium, they had bored into the earth so often and so deep to get the coal that this region is called the Boureng. The city of Mons is the center of the coal mining region, and here they still celebrate the victory of a brave knight over a mighty dragon. This dragon was quite an unusual monster, for his skin was all of shining gold, with scales like plate armor. He was as big as a battering ram, and his strength was like that of a catapult, which could hurl big stones into a city of the enemy's camp. More wonderful yet, this dragon of the Boureng had a flashing jewel in his forehead that was worth all the diamonds, rubies, and emeralds in the whole world. It shone like a lamp in the darkest nights and guided his path for him as he moved down from the hills to devour maidens. This monster was a conglomeration of all things terrible. He had every one of the powers which any and all beasts, birds, fishes, or reptiles possessed, whether on the earth, in the air, or under the waters. He had a roar like a lion, the wings of an eagle, the claws of a condor, and the power to glide like a snake or crawl like an alligator. He could fly like a falcon, burrow like a rat, swim like a shark, crush with his coils like an anaconda, and had a keen scent like a hound. He had eyes like a tiger, teeth like a wolf, and tusks sharper than a boar's, the horns of a rhinoceros, the antlers of a stag, the tossing horns of a bull, the double mustaches of a catfish, and the shell of a tortoise. He could breathe fire out of his nostrils and burn up the grass. With a nail in his tail, he could scratch a furrow like a plow. When he thrashed around in anger, he could deliver a blow like a battering ram. At the tips of his wings were hooks, as hard as steel. In short, he was like an encyclopedia of everything that was strong, vicious, and dreadful. It seemed as if all the might and force of the old creatures that had lived and died in the ancient forests before the ocean rolled in, and before the ages of coal, had risen to resurrection in him to make a monster combining all the powers of every living creature. The worst of the matter was that the Romans, coming into the land, soon found that none of their daughters would be left alive if that monster kept roaring and rambling about. In addition to his terror, no one could sleep at night for the noises that he made. His howling, bellowing, hissing, barking, and rumbling were kept up till sunrise. Yet, when he was quiet, it was still more dangerous, for then he was looking for his prey. No parents could trust their lovely daughters outdoors, by night or day. For any girl who was plump or pretty was sure to be gulped down alive or carried off to the dragon's lair in the hills. For this dragon, while always hungry, was very particular in his diet. He would never make a dinner on a man, or a boy, or a horse, or a pig, unless he had fasted a long while and was nearly starving. He thought they tasted too salty. He was always on the lookout for young and tender maidens, or those well-favored or fat, who might be out picking flowers or strolling along the road. These he would seize and then run away swiftly to his lair. He could easily outstrip any man on foot, even the fleetest runner. If men mounted on horseback to pursue him, he would spread his wide wings, give a flap or two, and then rise up into the air, almost darkening the sun and casting an awful shadow on the earth. It always smelled like burning brimstone where the dragon had been. Disappearing among the hills, he would enjoy a feast at his leisure. Soon, the cavern in which he slept was covered with maidens' bones. Not far away was a pit into which he threw what was left of the few men and boys, or pigs or ponies he had eaten up. While the dragon was coming down from the hills to make his evening meal of a pretty girl, or to swish her off to his cave, he was careful to sniff the air on every side, lest some brave men in hiding should rush out at him and put his eye out with an arrow, or push a spear down his throat, or throw fire or poison into his mouth. The dragon could easily swallow up a man, but he feared missiles shot or slung at him, whether arrows, sling stones, or catapult balls. There were certain parts of his body, such as his eyes or throat, or the soft places under his front and hind legs, and in the joints between the scales, where a barbed arrow or sword blow or spear thrust might penetrate. The Roman general promised that any man who would capture or slay this frightful monster that combined a whole menagerie in himself should marry his daughter. In addition, He should be owner of all the gold scales, which anyone could, with hammer and chisel, wrench off from the dragon. But the forehead jewel, after adorning the bride's coronet at her wedding, must be handed over to the Roman emperor for a crown possession. Now, there was a brave soldier named Rufinus who was in love with one of the Roman general's daughters and had expected to marry her when May and the flowers should come. He had gone to the great city of Rome to buy a gold ring for his sweetheart, besides jewels and pretty woven stuff for new clothes. But alas, in the week before he returned, the dragon had seized and carried her off to his lair to eat her up on the very day she was to be a bride. There was mourning in the father's home. The mother wept all day, and the old general was constantly asking, "Who will fight the dragon and rescue my daughter?" When Rufinus was on his way back home, he was met by a man, a native Belgian, famous for his skill as an archer. He too was in grief, because his only daughter had been grabbed by the dragon when out walking with the general's daughter, and he knew not whether she were yet alive. This man offered to go with Rufinus and help to slay the dragon, hoping that neither of the maidens had yet entered the monster's maw. Without waiting to see anyone, not even the general, Rufinus sharpened his sword and spear. He prepared to go out at once, on his swiftest horse to fight the monster. He took with him the Belgian archer, who knew all the paths and hiding places. Then they waited until the wind was favorable, so that the dragon would not get their scent and go off in another direction. Then they got windward of the monster and hid behind rocks in a thicket not far from the roadside. Toward evening, as the twilight deepened into dusk, Rufinus looked up toward the hilltops. He saw two round spots, like globes of fire, with something also which was glistening and sending out rays from the center of his forehead. These were the eyes of the dragon, with a flashing jewel in between. Soon, he saw the beams of the rising moon reflected from the golden scales as the terrible creature moved slowly down the mountainside. His monstrous nose was bigger than a buffalo's. He was sniffing the air to the right and to the left to catch sight either of a man in hiding or a maid walking. His long, thick mustaches, like whipcords, thrashed about at everything within reach. Now when the dragon moves along over the ground with folded wings, he never keeps his head quiet or straight for one moment, but sways it from side to side and up and down, as if to see everything and to catch the scent of any creature near, whether man or beast. So when Rufinus looked up, he saw this monstrous head, high in the air with open jaws, working and breathing out fire, which crackled like mimic lightning flashes. His long body, half hidden, trailed along in and out among the rocks and trees, the wind blowing toward them bore the odor of burning sulfur, which at times nearly suffocated them. Yet they dared not cough, lest the monster should hear them. Both men, Rufinus on horseback and the Belgian on foot, felt their hearts beating fast as the latter waited for the monster to get within arrow range, while Rufinus poised his spear and got ready to spur his horse forward. The Belgian trusted to speed his shaft into the monster's eye and blind him, while Rufinus hoped for a thrust of his weapon down into the red cavern into which so many maidens had slipped as food. Both brave fellows thought not only of the glory that they should win for killing the dragon and delivering the land from a curse, but of the joy and gratitude which the rescued maidens would feel toward them as their deliverers. They would fight, even if they should be eaten up. When within 100 yards of the two men, the monster paused to look around, as if he suspected danger. Then he reared up on his hind legs and tail. At this moment, the temptation to the Belgian archer to shoot was great, for he was then sure of hitting the dragon in the heart or stomach. But he kept his arrow on the string and waited. They could hear the rattling of the golden scales, one upon the other, while the roar that issued from the monster's throat, by which he expected to scare away any living enemies, reminded them of thunder echoing among the high mountains. "Shall I shoot?" whispered the Belgian excitedly to Rufinus. "Yes, but be cool. Take your time and aim for the left eye, the one nearest to us," answered the Roman. The Belgian drew the arrow clear up to his ear and let fly. The dragon's cry of pain was so horrible as almost to freeze the blood in the men's veins. His howls showed that the shaft had hit his mark. Then Rufinus, clapping spurs to his horse, dashed out into the path. The monster, half blinded, flapped his wings, arched his back, rose up on his hind feet and claws, and opened his terrible jaws to dart at and swallow up the daring Roman. To the horse and rider, there seemed to yawn a deep red cavern, down which both might in a moment slide. The two men trembled for a moment, but they did not flinch. Before a claw could touch Rufinus, he had run his long, steel-headed spear deep down into the monster's throat. Then he drove his rearing horse still forward and pushed the weapon further down and clear into the monster's heart. With a bellow that seemed to shake and rend the hills, making echoes even in the distant mountains, the writhing mass of force and flesh fell over. The vicious brute that one moment before seemed to be a combination of all brutes and able to face an army was now a lifeless mass, dead as a doornail. Rufinus, drawing his dirk, began digging out of the dragon's forehead the flaming jewel. Washing it off in the brook, he reveled in its splendor and wished it could be for his bride. The Belgian hacked off 4 or 5 of the golden scales to show to the Roman general as specimens and to prove his prowess, put them in his pocket. The two men now gave their attention to rescuing their loved ones. Neither the father nor the lover was by any means sure of finding the objects of their quest, the daughter and the betrothed. But after climbing up the path, a shout of recognition in the distance was heard. It was from both the maidens, who lifted up their voices together. For an hour or more, they were both laughing and crying. In the cavern lair, they found 4 other girls that were to make meals for the dragon. He usually kept a supply on hand. The wedding of Rufinus and his promised bride took place the following week, and the Belgian's daughter, her former companion in fear and misery, was one of the bridesmaids. All this time, the mechanics and goldsmiths, under command of an inspector, were busy in wrenching off the golden scales to make a dowry for the bride of Rufinus. One of the most skillful craftsmen set the dragon jewel in a coronet. This shone like a radiant star on the forehead of the lovely bride. She looked very sweet as she walked to church, while all the maidens in the town scattered flowers before her path. The 4 girls that had been rescued from the monster's lair led the van. And ever after that, the people of Mons have celebrated the festival of the victory of Rufinus over the golden dragon.